you're right, and the way to get like a good game here is to, number one, produce a good game, and then like Ponzi is such a strong word here, but like semi-financialize the growth aspect of it. Like if there's one thing we know how to do in crypto is to create like these structures of like farming and like incentives and like I do think there is a path there where I like I wouldn't say you full Ponzi, but you semi-Ponzi it, but like you semi-Ponzi it in a nice way.
So just a Ponzi tip is what you want.
Yeah, just a little bit of Ponzi.
And we're back. Welcome back to everyone for another highly informative podcast session with Demo, Mika, and Ricardo. We actually got feedback from the last podcast that someone was very annoyed that we didn't let Mika speak. They were like, "Why don't you let your guest speak?"
I'm now a series regular.
Yeah,
I'm not. You need to get more caffeinated, man.
Yeah. Well, that and also the appropriate response is because we knew he'd probably be back in the next episode, and so like we were going for balance amongst three people instead of just letting the guest speak. Having said that, though, I will recognize that, like, generally speaking, me and Ricardo have been poor with guests. Like,
okay,
I know
we're not the greatest interviewers, you know. Like, we just have a discussion, and if people come to the podcast hoping to hear our guest monologue, like that's not what's going to happen.
I'm okay with that.
I also kind of suspect that guests don't necessarily expect that it is going to be such a lively discussion, whereas Temo and I just used to push them back at each other. So when that starts happening, Rico's like, "Whoa, okay, let's give him a bit," and just take a step back.
Yeah, some people, like my wife often tells me that, like, you know, she doesn't want every conversation to be a debate. And my response is like, well, how else would we find the truth? But there are people who would rather not argue. Anyway, nice to be back. I think the last episode was pretty good. Like, it was good to have a slightly new take on things. We have quite a lot of things to get through, so we can just get started. We're probably not going to get through everything, but let's start with the Telegram situation. I can provide a brief background for people who, for some reason, haven't heard. I'm sure everyone has heard already, but Pavel Durov, the founder and I guess CEO or president or something
CEO,
of Telegram, was arrested in France, where he seemingly flew voluntarily on a private jet. Which was funny because I was listening to Tucker Carlson's video where he's like, I don't buy anything. I don't own anything. I don't get jets. He specifically said he doesn't buy jets. And then he was arrested after landing on a private jet in France. But whatever, if you have 14
well, he was
billion.
arrested after landing. He was arrested after landing on his private jet, which, if you're wanted, kind of makes it really easy to track you, right?
Yeah, I mean, maybe he didn't know he was wanted, or maybe not. But essentially, what's come out since then is that the arrest was justified as like Telegram / him being complicit in there's like child pornography distribution, essentially not moderating things like child pornography. There was some other, I don't know, misinformation. What were the different categories? Do you guys remember?
Money laundering is one.
Money laundering, yeah. So
all
this stuff that happens on Telegram, it seems the French, or at least that's publicly currently arguing that Telegram has not done enough to, you know, assist with that, or like doesn't follow their kind of policies and requirements for platforms like that. But yeah, so that's kind of what's going on. People have completely lost their fucking minds in the wake of this. I think there's been very little intelligent discussion about this. So I'm hoping to extend the unintelligent discussion here today, given none of us know much of anything about the situation. But like, let's maybe start with Ricardo. Like, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think he's a hero and a defender of free speech, or a Russian puppet?
Oh, I do like how we go for the binary thing. Yeah, definitely. Yes, it's probably the love child of Putin and Satan. No, man, look,
Nuance is
I
for
was,
wimps.
yeah, I was a little bit surprised by the arrest, mostly because I sent you guys the link. It actually surprised me that France is still on that legal ground with cryptography, that you actually need to register or ask for permission if you're from an external company. The fact that they're charging him with, from what I recall, the phrasing was something like providing cryptology services without registration or certification. Effectively, the way that this is described reads like in France: if you're a non-French company, if you're from the EU, you need to register anything that is not authentication or verification, which is effectively hash comparison. And I suspect that Telegram did not do that. If he did not do that, it seems kind of silly to be flying into France anyway. The rest of the stuff, who knows? Right, the fact that they're not complying with takedown requests for child pornography groups and whatnot is just simply fucking dumb, regardless on if I don't particularly care how much somebody believes in free speech. If you want to do business in a country, you should adhere to the laws of that country. And at the very least, you could go on the cryptography registration when you could go like, whoops, we fucked up, sorry, like we'll ask for certification right now. That other one is pretty fucking dumb. And then they're also throwing all the money laundering stuff at them, which I imagine is coming from the Ton side, but I really have no idea what's going on in Ton. As I mentioned, I only realized that Ton was still a thing like 4 or 6 weeks ago. So who the hell knows? Honestly, what I find weirder is the guy actually just flying in voluntarily if he was aware of this. I've read some reports on French sites, but my automatic translations, so maybe mistranslated, that he got notified first that he was on their, I guess the right word is indictment, but I don't know if that's the case or not. So who knows? Lord knows he can't afford a few lawyers, so maybe he just did it to prove a point or get ahead of the thing.
One thing to maybe just mention regarding that, like, I don't think it's outlandish. So Telegram apparently is like 40 people in terms of employees, and they have like 1 billion users. So like, it is possible that they simply can't manage the amount of moderation requests they get.
Oh, okay, first of all, bullshit. Let me go bullshit on a few things. He said he has like 30 engineers. He said this to Tucker Carlson on the same interview where he said he has no jet or material possessions. So, pass that through the same filter that you would need to filter a jet through. So that's thing one. Second, 30 engineers doesn't mean that you have 30 employees. And the third, I forget his name. Anyway, a mutual acquaintance of ours who I actually happened to meet at Equilibrium's office said that Telegram does respond to takedown requests, that he had issued a few in the past. So they do have some moderation team. If they are refusing to integrate with this particular international body that tries to address situations like child pornography and are actively refusing requests from the French government to address these cases, that seems like very actively wanting to shoot yourself in the foot.
Indeed. Maybe he should have specified he doesn't buy additional private jets to the current ones he owns or something like that. Mika, what are your thoughts?
I mean, there are two camps here that kind of immediately formed within the 5 minutes of the arrest information coming out. One is like the kind of free speech camp, and I guess the position there can be defended in a way that if you look at the charges, they're ones that in some sense you could probably apply to every single company that move stuff on the internet in a way, and that I guess people, and the charitable interpretation is that you're kind of worried about the future encroachment on those ideas, and like they're going to be applied quite broadly to kind of overregulate this stuff. And that's probably the one that, for example, like we on crypto Twitter who lived there kind of saw the most. And then from the other side, you kind of have the usual points of skepticism, which is around that, well, Telegram isn't, like, they didn't put themselves in a position where it's an encrypted service and they can't do anything or stuff like that. And also that there may be some questionable Russia ties or how the thing has been funded throughout the years that you can be kind of skeptical about. So probably in some sense, both of those can be true in a way, I guess. Like there is something to be concerned about in just the overregulation and overreach over the longer period on how this applies to all internet services. But maybe this case, it's hard to know, but maybe this case isn't the kind of end up being a shining, beautiful example of that political talking point at the end once all the information comes out, but kind of who knows.
Yeah. Well, I think there's, like, relating to that, there's a couple of things. One is that Telegram is certainly not a shining example of like defending people's freedoms. I think that's like, and this is something that Zuko, Zuko from Zcash,
Suko Wilcox.
yeah, has been harping on Twitter, which I appreciate because he's kind of like taken a bit of a stand against the general sentiment at a time when like every big name was like, oh no, France is destroying free speech online. And like Telegram has had very, very like not, how would I, like very misguided or their marketing makes it seem like there's some kind of secure messenger. In fact, mostly they are not. In fact, I'm fairly sure that according to most security experts, Telegram has like one of the worst encryption schemes, even in the case where you actually use it, as in you need to explicitly turn it on in order to get secret messages. Most people do not do that. But even if you do, there's I remember back in the day we did some experiments with Telegram, specifically around like adding new devices. And the fact that it's so easy to add a new device and get secret messages showing on that new device is like, it's a bit weird. But this was
Wait,
back
you
in the day. I
actually-
don't know exactly how it works now.
You actually got secret messages working on the device? Because all my attempts only worked on point to point.
But this was a long time ago, so like they
Okay.
may have evolved from this, but the fact that that was their secure mechanism back in the day, and then that it changed, like it slightly smells like a head fake, and they don't do a lot of work to try to convince people that it's actually really good. They just do marketing, and people don't know. But that's sort of like one thing. So like the thing to understand is that as far as we know, Facebook, Messenger, WhatsApp, Signal all have end-to-end encryption for reals, and Telegram does not. Right?
Facebook Messenger? I'm not sure about Facebook Messenger. I know they integrated the Signal
pretty
stuff
sure it
into
has.
WhatsApp. No,
Well, we can
I
check.
don't believe so.
Yeah, I think it's WhatsApp only.
I mean, I'm a Facebook user, but I understand that the Facebook Messenger does not. In fact, they use Facebook Messenger messages for ad targeting.
Well, 2023, they say they've launched end-to-end encryption on Facebook Messenger by default.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Which, like, to be honest, if you were Mark Zuckerberg, like, and you want to make your life easier, that's the way. Like, that's the way. Like, the amount of heat, that was coming from, like, oh, you might be tilting the scales or whatever. Like, you would have this information, but you're not giving us. Just end-to-end encrypt it, and then don't worry about it. Let the NSA focus their efforts on cracking the devices or the OSs or whatever, and don't worry about it. But this is my point, right? Like pretty much everything else except Telegram. And so I think there's this one news article which described it pretty well, is like Telegram is a like data vacuum for Pavel Durov, the person. You know?
Look, Telegram is a social media app with a chat interface. Frankly,
Yeah.
that's what it is. I am aghast at the fact that I keep finding people in the crypto community who actually think that Telegram is secure and encrypted by default for whatever reason. But yeah, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, I mean, and then there's a more nuanced discussion here as well. Like, I also don't trust Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp or Signal for that matter. I kind of think about it from the perspective of like, okay, if I use Signal, it's probably the NSA that's reading my messages and not, the Kremlin. And then if I use something else, it's something else, right? Like if you're on WeChat, this is the Chinese government, etc. If you don't want your messages to be read in any circumstance, then I don't know, speak them out loud in an isolated environment to the person and make sure there's no one recording, or keep them in your head.
Actually, no. There's the not even that. There's that old line that the only way for 3 people to keep a secret is if 2 of them are dead. But no, the only foolproof encryption mechanism is a one-time pad. Having said that, as I was telling someone in Buenos Aires who was calling Signal the CIA op, it's at the very least it's encrypted, and if the CIA is after you, have bigger problems. So why do you care?
Yeah, this is the way to think about security, is like there is no such thing as security if like you're the founder of Silk Road and every possible organization is after you. Like you can't trust anything. If however you're not that, then like there's such a thing as enough security, and what you actually want to avoid is just like some big data dump that will occur at some point from one of these services, and Telegram is a prime candidate for that, actually. But okay, moving on from that. So that's just like Telegram, first of all, I don't think represents the values as such that people are making it out to represent. But it is a very useful service and it's quite popular.
Look, man, I think there's. I am very much pro free speech, and it annoys the hell out of me how the community tends to react in a knee-jerk manner whenever somebody uses free speech as attack, right? Like people support Elon Musk every time he says that he's pro free speech, even though there's multiple but reams of evidence that the guy doesn't really give a shit about free speech. He just doesn't want to be censored himself. And in Telegram, it seems to be a similar case, right? People who would not have suggested Telegram as any sort of bastion for secure communications or trustworthy communications are jumping because on one side, people are arguing free speech.
Yeah, and I think Mika covered it relatively well. So there's sort of the camp that's like free speech forever, like an attack on Tornado Cash is an attack on all of us kind of thing. And there's a nuanced conversation to be had about like what does it actually make sense to defend as a community. I don't think it's super clear. You kind of do want to set some boundaries, and if your position is largely defensive, maybe you want to be aggressive with those boundaries and slow down the progress of the enemy, as it were. But going back to sort of this original thing, so I think there's there's 2 pieces of information which I think are fairly interesting. One is that it came out that actually Macron and like basically the whole French government are massive Telegram users. And probably thought it was really secure.
Interestingly, because the Telegram government
have been given guidance by some internal security team that Telegram is not secure and they should use a French app, and they haven't.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's even sillier because because the French government had adopted Matrix for its own communications with an actual open source peer-reviewed encryption protocol on top, where they get to silo the data if they want, like the whole thing. And they're still fucking using Telegram, man.
well, that maybe says more about Matrix's UX than it does about Telegram. But the other piece of information is that like there's not like super direct evidence, but it does seem like Telegram is also very much embraced by the Russian state. So widely used in the Russian state, and also seemingly at least funded in some way. Like the explicit information that is sort of out there is very vague because Telegram has released bonds as their main funding model, as it seems, which is weird because bonds you need to pay interest. Where's the money coming from? I don't know. But you don't need to release that information. And so there are definitely oligarchs who are investors in these bonds. There are definitely Russian banks who are investors in these bonds, etc. And there isn't, I don't know if this is true or just trolling, but it does. There was some reporting that apparently Pavel Durov was meeting Putin like a few days earlier before being arrested somewhere. This may or may not be true, but like suffice to say that like whatever Telegram actually is and whatever its political positioning is, the narrative that it's like in an all-out war against the Russian state, which is what has been very seemingly deliberately crafted through the years, seems to be completely false. And there's even some like weird stuff, like when he was like, the narrative is that when he ran VKontakte, which is like the Russian Facebook, like the Kremlin was like, give us the data of some whatever opposition, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, no. And then they were like, you can leave the country and we'll give you all the money. Which is like, maybe, but like,
Yeah, if there's
apparently he walked off with 700 million or something like that. And it's like, maybe, but if I'm the Russian state, I like, why would I do that? Like it's
well, that and on top of that, they have had a very public history recently of not handling things in such a generous and benevolent manner when people disagree with them.
well, I don't think Putin's regime has ever been known for, nuance and subtlety in their way of handling political situations. But anyway, so there's a lot of questions around that. And so I think like one thing that Zuko is doing, and I was tweeting about this as well, which I think is very reasonable, is like maybe he is a staunch defender of free speech, but I think it's like relatively naive to just like buy into that wholesale and be like, France is like, this is a crime against humanity, like blah blah blah. Like it's a bit too easy. It's probably not that simple, and I'm not saying that he's necessarily a Russian puppet or anything like that, but I do think like there's probably things going on in the background which we're just not aware of. So, and this maybe comes to my core point. I think this is like, and this is me putting on my tinfoil hat. I think this is fully like behind the scenes politics stuff. I think the stuff that will be shown to the public and told to the public is like largely irrelevant as far as the whole thing. And actually there's some like power games going on. The funniest one, like, which, people want to not think that the Russians are very good, nor the French. So maybe they're just fighting over who gets whose data, because Telegram has both of their data. But yeah, so
the other thing that was funny. Okay, so before getting into that, this could be a case of why not both, right? It is perfectly possible that there's something nefarious going on. It's perfectly possible that Telegram is infested with child porn. Who knows? But it is also perfectly possible that this
probably. Like,
well,
okay,
as far as I know, the French
run,
have clear examples.
I run a community-driven video website which had 10 million monthly active users at its peak, and the amount of porn that we had was insane. And Telegram is almost 1 billion users. there's gonna be child porn. Like,
So
even if they did their utmost, there would still be child porn, which maybe is part of like why people are annoyed, because like this is the case with everything, as Mika said. Like, there's child porn probably on Reddit. There's probably child porn on Facebook. There's like, it's everywhere.
look,
Yeah, that's the thing.
is,
Like, even if this is like kind of a deep state battle, in public, still the things that he will be charged with are quote unquote crimes, which you could extend to other operators quite easily, and for sure have if you have a little bit more imagination, a case against a lot of people.
Well, I think this was Ricardo's point in our private DMs, is like, kind of regardless of what the motivations are, like it does create a precedent.
Yeah, that's my why not both thing, right? This guy could be an FSB operative. That doesn't mean that this is not a way to create a precedent and just overreach into anything that has to deal with encryption. I was encouraged to see that in French law, EU companies only need to register their encryption use in France. They don't need to ask for permission like non-EU companies. That means that there's still some sanity in there, but then that basically just means they need to deal with the encryption laws in their own country, and that's it.
But defending that non-EU position, right? Like, if a company from China says, yeah, it's encrypted, like, that doesn't mean anything. Like, unless it's open source, we don't know if it's encrypted or not. It doesn't, like, and they have no way to due diligence that.
That for me
but
would
I'm saying,
be...
like, that actually makes sense to like look at those external operators on a case-by-case basis and requiring a little bit more due diligence on that front, because like you can't even go after them. You need to wait until they voluntarily fly into the country.
That's the thing that's really bizarre for me about this. Just complying with this bit about registering that you're using encryption or asking for permission in the first place, not now, right? When Telegram was an app with whatever, a few thousand users and you started distributing it. That seems like such a trivial thing to do, that some of the basic things that they didn't do that could have been effectively tick this box, right? And they refused to tick that box, seem to be like so stupidly unnecessarily painting a target on your back.
Yeah. Moving on to Tron. So I think the conclusion was there is no conclusion, as expected. But moving on to Tron, which is the sort of cryptocurrency launched by the Telegram ecosystem, or the Telegram company. They tried to launch at some point and they were somehow blocked in the US, but then somehow they launched anyway later. Do you, Mika, know the history kind of that project, and like, what is it, I guess, in general, for people who might not know?
Yeah, I mean, it has been a bit of an up and down situation in terms of how much effort it seems like Telegram has been putting into it, and how like what the tech looks like. Even like it's gone through a couple of iterations through the past years, but they were kind of like a darling name in a way, launching in the kind of previous cycle, and then they kind of redone that same thing here again. And for investors and VCs, it's kind of an attractive proposition in a way, because the most important thing in the world kind of is distribution. They have distribution, so you can make the argument that whatever they're running could be quite popular, and that kind of brings in investments and make the ecosystem larger. And I think, like, for example, Pantera said that that's their largest position they've ever taken, as well. So there's kind of a lot of backing there, but it's also a very kind of odd situation where it does seem like the effort did wane a lot over the past couple of years and only kind of came back recently. And the startups that are being built, it's kind of a lot of running the same playbook back as well from like previous chains, where okay, now there's like a lot of EVM L2s and L2s being built on Telegram, and it's unclear why you would even do that, or does anyone even know how to build that stuff, because it's like a completely new environment for builders as well. So there's kind of something. And then there are like these reports about some hamster game that has like 1% of the world population playing it, which you have to be so stupid to believe. but like people will jump on those things as well. So yeah, it's kind of it's very difficult to tell, and it doesn't feel like you're building on a truly neutral platform, like you would be on a kind of Ethereum or something else. So it is a bit of a strange case, but then there is this also kind of potential for a lot in some ways if it really becomes like a real payment rails and a real interaction rails through Telegram. So
Yeah, what I'm curious about is like what they actually did to launch in the end. And maybe none of us know, but like how does one get blocked in the US? Like, because that project like died at some point and then came back, and it was like were they trying to launch from the US, which seems weird,
No,
or like what
okay.
happened?
From what I recall, they got blocked from taking U.S. investment, and I don't recall the exact number. It was something like they offered to give the money, like 70% of the money back to investors. There was some sort of haircut that U.S. investors had to take, but it was specific to the U.S. investors. I will need to look it up though, because this was a few years ago.
yeah, this was it was 1.7 billion, the original ICO, and I think it was 2018 or maybe 2019. But then they had the SEC lawsuit after that, and basically SEC argued that the ICO broke securities laws, and that's kind of what stopped it for a while. And I think they even had like official announcement that they abandoned it or something like that. That it was completely gone at some point. But then yeah, now it seems to have come back. Yeah.
Yeah, there was an open source dump of sorts at some point. Like they just like, hey, we're just gonna throw this on GitHub. I'd forgotten that part.
Yeah, that was called Free Tron, and then people started kind of building it back out in a way.
Was it the old we'll just open source it on GitHub in case somebody wants to just run it launch strategy?
I don't know, because there's still like Telegram is still involved as far as I know. So it wasn't just like, oh no, it's not us, it's just those 5 anonymous over there.
I mean, they have like a new foundation for it, which like how connected it is to Tron, because like the fork kind of like took its own sort of life, and then the foundation I think kind of came out of that. So it does seem like a situation where, oh yeah, we're gone, but then not really. Like we just found a new structure to do it.
We just found a new structure to do it without all the fanfare, because it wasn't largely publicized, right? Like I don't remember ever seeing like Tron blockchain live.
No, like I said, I was quite surprised.
Now it's trading at 24 billion FDV.
Yeah, and like if you go to the sites and like download the wallets, like the stuff, it kind of works like other chains as well in a way. Like you can download a wallet, you can move Tron, but what the apps are, I don't know. But there is like EVM L2s being built, because like obviously when you have a new virtual machine, you build an L2 from the other virtual machines, so, because then you can combine the words in a new beautiful way. So it's kind of like that kind of activity is happening there.
Jesus.
Because if you have like a move chain, you can always do an EVM L2, an SVM L2, and if you have like an EVM chain, then you can do an SVM L2 or a move L2, and because so there's like if you multiply the matrices, you get like a good 18-20 startups out of that playbook.
Well, you maximize the copy paste area.
Yes.
And like there are some arguments for this, right? Like I think the proliferation of like EVM chains or L2s has shown that like there is a benefit to just be able to take a DEX and put it onto another place. Like you get basic infrastructure basically for free, and you don't need to build it out from scratch, which like does help bootstrap stuff. I don't know how that'll actually work when like every possible chain has every possible environment. Like not all.
Yeah,
of
you
these
have like
things.
wallet compatibility issues immediately, like from the Tron to like the Tron L2 EVM, quote unquote. You actually do have like
Yeah.
wallet support issues as well there.
Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting. Like investors started kind of talking about this a few months ago, and it was pretty random. Like I was just on some VC calls, and they were like, "Oh, we've actually been looking at Tron." Like, what? I thought it was dead. What happened?
Yeah. Blue
But then
Ocean,
like
Blue
everyone's like,
Ocean.
we're looking at Tron, but then like we don't really know. Like there doesn't seem to really be any like investable projects, and I'm like, okay, well, why are you looking at Ton then? Like,
Yeah, because it started off. It's weird. The VC landscape, as far as I saw these projects, was like we kind of jumped over a lot of like the basic infra in a way, and we ran into like L2s immediately. Are those strange? Like really? Like L2s isn't like the base supposed to be like sharded and fast and whatever like combination of tech
well, it
that it's
also
using.
went down.
Yeah,
for the
yeah,
second
yeah.
time just now.
And no one said anything.
Oh,
for,
wow.
like, yeah.
I mean, going down is fine. Like, there's no reason to criticize that. But I think the performance stuff is like like a little bit outdated for this day and age potentially. I don't know. But it is curious. Like, I've never met a Telegram or like Ton user. Like, where are these people hiding? I think there's zero in the West. Maybe they're
I
all
have
somewhere else.
I have no idea. So I was just in Argentina, and in Argentina, I met two different teams who had built upon Stellar. And Stellar, I assumed that absolutely nobody was doing anything with. So I've met two more Stellar developers than I've met people who just use Stone at all.
This is the weird kind of Schrödinger's users situation that we have in like these ecosystems. Because from our perspective, it's always surprising to see Tron stablecoin usage. But then it does seem to be like it actually, to an extent at least, does seem to be there. And if it's hard to always tell if you're doing your community is focusing on the right things, or because our blockchains are used by so few people today. So then like there's an argument that, okay, actually the real user group that comes in, you may kind of miss it because you're in your like own community. And then, oh yeah, there's these 800 million people on Telegram, and that's your user base, and it's so much larger than anything we've had, and you kind of just missed out on that entire thing. So, but then in practice, it's never been yet so that those users actually really exist.
Sorry, did you say Ton?
Tron.
Tron stable or Tron? Oh, Tron.
Tron, yeah.
Tron to me is not that weird. It's just cheap rails. I don't think anybody holds, and I don't think a lot of people hold on Tron. But Tron
is weird? What is weird about Tron is that suddenly in the last 6 months, like the Ethereum Foundation has started defending Tron.
The what?
The Ethereum Foundation has started saying like Solana bullshit, but Tron. Well,
are you kidding me?
No.
We could have led the call with that
in the Anatoly Justin Drake debate.
Yeah,
I didn't finish that one. Interesting.
I mean, so like I'm just saying like that Tron I think is like an interesting case because it was like very widely considered incredibly sketchy for most of its existence.
It is incredibly sketchy. It still is.
Right, it is. But there is usage, but like one very crude take potentially is that like money laundering is a big use case.
Well, not just that. From my understanding, there's
people moving between exchanges and all these other things. Like
there's a lot of that, but I also understand that it is quite used in the Chinese community in general. In fact, I heard in Argentina a lot of the commerce, like little bodegas, basically, like the kind of like small shops. They all operate around Tron. They're more than happy to receive Tron, USDT and Tron if you want. And that is by and large, I think like 8 or 9 out of 10 of those shops are run by Chinese families, like maybe second generation. So.
Hmm.
Do you guys know
Could be.
how much Tron or how much Tether is on Tron? Just
It was a silly amount from what I remember. It was like 2 times what's on Solana, 3 times what's on Solana, something like that.
so it's you're not even in the right ballpark with this one.
Wow.
There's 100 DeFi Llama, 118 billion of Tether, and 59.6 billion is on Tron. 46.6 is on Ethereum. 3.9 is on BSC. 2.7 is on Arbitrum, and 1.9 is on Solana. There you go.
Wow.
That's Why is there 60 billion like on Tron? You know, like I understand that there's some exceptional payment use cases happening, and people do talk about this, like, oh yeah, they went to somewhere and in Georgia and they're like everyone's paying in Tron stablecoins. 60 billion, there's a lot of activity going on in Georgia, man. Like, you know,
That's a lot of small Chinese run shops in Buenos Aires, man.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. It's weird. But I mean, it has been very cheap for a very long time, and it has seemingly sort of like broadly remained functional, which is like, you know, regardless of whether the use cases are sketchy or not, like it's been going for a long time, which is like impressive in itself.
Yeah. I was gonna say something snarky and dismissive, but let's move it on. Move it ahead.
Yeah. One stablecoin thing which I found very funny, by the way, last week is that your I don't know, the Monerium stablecoin, they announced that they're migrating the stablecoin to a new version.
Oh,
Right. My reaction exactly. So you will have to get your stablecoins, put them in some whatever thing, get new stablecoins. Like, they're migrating.
Why? Like, did they forget the freeze authority at first, or what the hell happened?
I don't know. Did they make their stablecoin smart contracts immutable by accident? Like, I have no idea. It sounds completely insane. You need
does remind me-
upgradability from a regulatory perspective. So, like, what's been going on?
It does remind me now, of course, the big news is Maker rebranding and DAI rebranding as well.
But have they announced the rebrand names?
Yeah, Sky is the name of the new Maker token, so you can swap your MKR to Sky for like one MKR is 24,000 Sky, and then DAI is USDS now. And yeah, maybe this is going a bit off topic, but it's still, I think, interesting to cover because this is something that Ruin specifically has worked on for a long time, and
Endgame.
he's called the Maker Endgame. And I think the right take here kind of is that I think I like the guy a lot, and I think he has a great idea, but I think he is a bit late in terms of, because a lot of the kind of growth strategies around the new stable coin is meant to be around kind of like token incentives for these different parts of Maker that do kind of different functions for it, and this new token also kind of allows you to do new token incentives, and the kind of incentives that are there. There's like an early registration thing where you double your points and whatever. I think he's kind of late to this kind of, like, all these things get formed so industrially nowadays that I don't know if this is like the right growth strategy at this point. I guess it's kind of similar to what we talked about in the last podcast about augmenting the cap table, which this kind of allows you to do. But I think the mechanics of like all the different sub DAOs that are working for it and their tokens and then Maker's token, and kind of doing these things where there's some like growth incentives, then there's some liquidity incentives that, and then you kind of package the sub DAO token with the Maker token, so there's like an exchange rate between them that gets like locked in some ways, and it's a super complex system. And like, but people do kind of learn those systems very well nowadays, and they just kind of farm it in a way. So I don't know if it's like actually great growth strategy. And whereas like the DAI brand was still quite large, and you can still do kind of interesting growth strategies around that. Like Spark was a big hit, and you can grow it in periods of a lot of demand. You can basically make the borrowing costs super low because you're like a central bank currency issuer, and you can compete through that. I just thought there was like a ways to compete in a more traditional way than to go down this hole of like layered incentives.
But they're not ditching the traditional path, right? Like my read or my understanding of the split here is basically like there's kind of two factions within Maker, or maybe inside Rune, I don't know. One is sort of like real world assets, like integration into the traditional financial system, and the other is like hardcore anarchist, like nobody can touch your stuff and everything is immutable. And those two are kind of at odds because they're like there are UX problems with the like hardcore anarchist vision in terms of like if you have a stable coin backed only by highly volatile on-chain assets, that's problematic, which is why Maker adopted USDC quite early to just stabilize their price as collateral. And so I think that sort of kind of makes sense to split those two. However, what's very unclear to me is how large is the hardcore use case? Like I think the traditional sort of use case is actually like very large in the long term. But the hardcore use case, like I feel like that's bound to maybe become a little bit niche. Like now you're like you need to choose, are you going to go like web 2 or web 3? That's kind of like the thing they're proposing, and you can switch back at this point, but governance can stop the switch at some later date. And it's like I don't know, like I'm like do I want to convert my Maker into something else? Like there's like this whole like sort of like collectively owned central bank of web 2 thing, and then there's like we have money that isn't controlled by anyone, but then also nobody uses or accepts.
Maker kind of had that war already, I would say, back in the day, and the US adding USDC as a collateral. The problem was that the DAI price kept going over $1 because the demand for it for leverage is too high. So you basically create like a one-to-one swap arbitrage opportunity. Like stablecoins, of course, the problem classically people talk about is if it goes under the peg value, so under $1. But actually, in practice, the other problem is like just as big for the mechanism design, and there's no way to fix that without having basically USDC or an equivalent as collateral. So that's kind of where the game was already like changed in a way, and then the kind of splitting off happened from there already. It's like RAI, Liquidity, these things, those were the kind of answer to that. And the simple thing that those run into is that it's not scalable. Like you can't create a huge demand. Yeah, I mean, there's the demand comes from leverage. Like that's the base of your like where the demand comes from. So in times where crypto is very volatile, like the demand can be there to an extent, but even that is like capped in a way, and it's not capital efficient, of course, because you're over collateralizing things by like you have 150% collateral minimum. So you have to go through this real world asset side. So I think that for Maker was already like a lost battle in a way. I think this one, like Endgame, it does have elements of that, but I think it also has just elements of weird token mechanics. Like I challenge any listener here to go read the Endgame proposal.
I've tried.
Like I worked on Maker governance for like a couple of years. I don't understand it fully. There was a point at which I think I understood all the mechanics, but I can't explain them to you now. They're like so complex behind these like tokens that like go read that, and if you understand that, you're a better man than me, like, or a better person than me.
Pingos, and we'll have you on to explain it to us.
Yeah. But it's interesting to see what happens. Like the one thing I do give Rune a lot of credit for is like, you know, he is pushing it forward in like a founder type way, even at a scale when he doesn't need to anymore. So I appreciate that, and I think like if it works, it. So my read is what Rune is going for is that there is a more sort of I like complicated is one way to think about it, but the other way to think about it is just like you need to design pretty nuanced incentives to run a whole organization in a decentralized way, and that's kind of what he's trying to do. Um, and there's not really any other way. Like you either have those outsourced to companies, and companies have this sort of like long, like the rules are just as complicated, but they come from this like long legacy of stuff, so they don't need to be reinvented all the time. But if you're trying to create on-chain laws and incentives for a company like structure to operate in a decentralized way, like that's bound to be quite complicated. So I have sympathy for that, and I think like the exciting thing for me is just like if it works, I think it changes the way, like it opens up people to thinking about doing things like that more. It's kind of like we had like compound governance, and that was like, yay, okay, it works, everybody, let's use that. But if this works, then like I think there's going to be a lot of things that start to do similar things, and I think that will be more effective because like what token projects run into is the same problems that governments kind of have or have had in the past, right? Like if you make every explicit decision a token vote, you're trying to involve 100% of the people in things that impact a tiny portion of people, and people don't have the attention span, they don't have the energy, etc., to be that involved, and that's why you have things like companies which kind of like defer a lot of that problem and so on. um so
Rune definitely has
like
the
I think
experience.
it's a good direction to explore, but I think it's also highly experimental, so in that sense it's also highly risky, um which might also be a justification for the split, right? Is like one side can explore a bit more sort of aggressively while the other can go for safety and stability and so on.
Rune does have a lot of experience in kind of this governance area more than almost anyone kind of in the
On
industry.
planet
Uh,
Earth.
yeah, and he has really like you can see how much effort he's put into like thinking about the incentives. There is something like you can think about two ways of complexity in a way. You can think like simple primitives that like have complex behavior in them, or you can have like complex structures that you want to be able to make right decision. I think this one goes into the complex structure kind, whereas like where we last week or a couple of weeks ago talked about metadata futarchy, you have like a simple mechanism that you can use that you think will enable like good stuff in a lot of complex situations. But this one is kind of you impose the complexity in a way from top down, and there I think you just take a huge risk in terms of if you make a mistake, then it kind of goes off the rails very quickly.
Yes, that's true, but like I think there's also an argument to be made that like a simple mechanism is probably always the right one to start out with, but any real world problem ends up requiring quite a complex system over the long term. And so if you think about like a company's governance when it's a startup, whatever, like you can have very light everything. Once you're 100,000 people, that's no longer viable. And so you do need to like evolve it over time. And so complexity increases, but complexity usually increases kind of like relatively slowly over the lifespan of the project. And in these crypto projects, you sort of have a different model where it's like complexity is the same, or at least abstracted into the background. And then if you want to increase complexity to deal with like a much larger scale or whatever, you need to make like this big leap, which is like not ideal. Um, and so it may be too large of a leap. That's entirely possible, but I don't think it's like I do think like inevitably, if you're running a complex organization at scale, like the system by which it is run is fairly complex, or a dictatorship. Like, Linux is a sort of like a large organization at scale. It doesn't have that much complexity because it's just a full-blown dictatorship.
This is also the kind of good part on what you mentioned earlier about this kind of being a founder-led initiative in a way, because Rune kind of stepped back and allowed governance to take over. And I would say there's reasons to be kind of very unhappy about a lot of things that happened in that process. And then like coming back to kind of exert more control makes a lot of sense if you care about the success of the project. And like that's how it's the simplest way to design these things as well, which is like lock into the smart contracts what you can, what you can't, run like in a startup fashion, be founder led, have a vision, push those things forward. And so I think it's like overall, if like more of these DAOs operated like this, the result would be, I think, quite much better than what we have today. It's just in this particular case, I'm kind of skeptical of the exact mechanics that
Yeah,
are.
but I think on a high level, sub DAOs make a lot of sense. And the only reason there usually aren't sub DAOs is just because it's like nobody has had time to implement shit like that. But yeah, Ricardo.
I mean, we're just reiterating here, I think, and I have no dog in this race. I kind of lost interest in Maker once 50% of the collateral was USDC. I did skew more towards the anarcho-capitalistic side, and if 50% of your collateral is USDC, you might as well just be holding USDC anyway. So at that point, I didn't care anymore. I do agree with what you said about the anarcho-capitalist use case probably being the smallest one. I mean, Zcash fucked up a lot of things with their infighting, but we can probably see Zcash as sort of a proxy for the demand on that side of things. I absolutely agree with you, Mika, that I tried to get through that thing, and it was such a complex thing that, I mean, have you guys heard of Gauss law? Right, this is that a complex system. Gauss law, yeah, it's a object design thing. Well, basically, it says that complex system that works is invariably found to have evolved from a simpler system that also works, but that a complex system designed in the first place to be complex can and will never work. So that was basically my entire impression with that. It's like you're trying to figure out all this potential interactions in advance and then place this whole structure out there. Like, more power to you if you make it work, but I'm not gonna make a financial bet on your odds.
Yeah, I mean, there's like I think complexity can be added, but it needs to happen relatively incrementally and in sort of layers, where each additional layer, like where you kind of build up a foundation that you can rely on, and then you can add layers of abstraction. One thing I will say,
you figure out the simple thing is working. Now let's try stuff. You codify the stuff that works, and you keep going that way. Trying to codify everything at once, it's particularly when we're dealing with random, volatile things like people. Good luck.
yeah. Well, this is a good segue into a topic titled Vitalik and DeFi, the unloved story, or something like that. But basically, Vitalik got a lot of flack for questioning whether the circular nature of the DeFi economy is actually good or not. Basically, people's reaction was like, don't hate on our projects, our bags are big, and we don't want anyone to say project not good. Which was not actually what he was saying. But basically, as far as I can tell, he was arguing that somewhere there needs to be a real economy. And someone narrating this, who I saw on Twitter, was like, somewhere there needs to be the Facebooks and the whatever, which is sort of like, okay, sure, but like maybe realistically, like somewhere there needs to be food and shelter and shit like that. Like, I don't know that Facebook is necessarily like the the holy grail of having a stable economy. But anyway, I'm curious to hear what you guys think of that. Probably mainly Mika, since Ricardo just sits in his Solana cave.
I would say that Vitalik's points apply overall. I mean, Solana's projects are following a similar, we're just going to launch a token because we can, and you get to put it here and rehypothecate it in this way. So, but go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, well, maybe just to elaborate this a little bit. So basically what Vitalik is saying is like DeFi is like a real thing. It works. It's great. DeFi yields, there you can make money in DeFi, but it's circular in the way that like the things you are trading or lending or whatever in DeFi are essentially other DeFi tokens that benefit from this, and that like there's not very many right now sort of real assets that come from elsewhere or have business models in the real world, which may change now that we're starting to get real world assets on chain and so on and so on. And you could argue that one area where DeFi has succeeded in creating real world opportunity is in stablecoin related things. So if you're lending out a stablecoin, that is like a real thing. You can use that money wherever, etc. And is not sort of circular in the way that many others are. But if you're speculating on the price of Maker, then you're very much doing something kind of circular. Maker is maybe not the best example because they're lending and then blah, blah, blah. You could argue that's real economy. But anyway, Mika.
Yeah, I mean, structural. When Vitalik talks about DeFi, I think it is a territory that for him isn't his favorite in a way, at least relative to kind of what the market has valued so far. And I think he has like more ideas about how a lot of different things on chain are going to like revolutionize through privacy or whatever, kind of make the world a better place. But he did say in one of his comments, I think the right idea, which was that he has seen and has understood that structurally, DeFi, there are like some advantages that you can point to compared to traditional finance, and that there is value there. And I think Anatoly has like kind of articulated better and taken it further, which is that it's kind of like people probably underestimate how much value and how much like GDP growth and overall well-being you can unlock by making the water flow faster and make things go better. And that use case kind of over time, and now it's like very internal casino, but you do see the growth of these real world assets and stuff. You kind of over time migrate to bringing all of finance on chain. And if it is structurally better as a system, so lower latency, faster settlement, more liquid order books, like global liquidity and reach 24/7, the kind of finance will find its way onto those platforms eventually. And I think we're kind of in the first innings of that. And that is, I think, what Vitalik necessarily doesn't see that much is that how much a positive impact that has in the world in a way, where like finance, it's the plumbing, it sort of doesn't create value by itself. It's like a friction point in a way for or systems within finance. Financial concepts are like create value, but friction within finance decreases value. So whatever you can do to decrease that friction, and that's the basic use case, I think that DeFi will get to once it's scaled to kind of more and more use cases. That's where you get to, and that I think is, I don't want to put like words in his mouth, but I think he kind of underrates the importance of just that aspect happening.
Yeah,
I don't necessarily agree. I mean, he is not. I would need to revisit it, but he again did not seem to be against DeFi or mostly, let's say, a mostly financialization of crypto. He seemed to be against the circular games, as Temo put it. And for what it's worth, I do think that Vitalik has had in the past good timing about being contrarian about some things. including which a lot of the people pitching at him right now probably don't even remember. But remember in 2017, I think it was on the ICO boom when everybody was talking about the crypto market cap, and Vitalik put out this whole post to like, yeah, the market cap is really nice, but have we earned it? The whole market imploded a week and a half later or something of the sort. So I do think he has a good nose for
Maybe
these
that's
things.
why.
I do
Maybe-
think
maybe
you're
that's-
right about that. I don't disagree with that point, and I think that's the one where I think it's felt by a lot of people who've been in crypto a long time, is this kind of slight frustration towards things not quite progressing into those real world use cases as fast as possible. And I think there's good reasons for that. And in the fullness of time, this is such a small scale that we've done so far that it would be unrealistic to actually expect that. But that frustration, I think, is felt by many people who've been in the industry for a longer while, and I think that is correct. I would say my point is kind of like, because like a lot of people, my point was it could be easily conflated with like the fast criticism that he got, which was like, oh, you hate my bags kind of one. And I don't think it's quite that. I would say like there's he's correct and he's right to make that point. I do think there's an element in his writing where he like, for me, I think of that like finance as the number one use case for these things, and I think he doesn't necessarily quite think that. But that's like a nuanced opinion about like how large you think the market cap and TAM of these different use cases are versus like general point. I think is correct from him.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Vitalik has this like sort of internal conflict in some ways, where the reasons that he's kind of spent all this time working on this stuff are over here, and then everything that has actually made this stuff popular is over here. And he seems to not, like, understandably, he's not super excited about any of the big demand drivers essentially that have existed, which are like NFTs, shit coins, or like, shitcoin trading, which then there are many elements of like perps and stuff. And the DeFi thing, I think in his mind, has emerged to facilitate this sort of like other speculative behavior. And there is truth in that, I think. But I also agree that like financial rails is like kind of the main thing. Like the conflict stems from like he wants to think about stuff like, Ethereum could be used to identify everywhere and whatever, and that has no TAM like in terms of dollars, right? And so you have this conflicting thing where like the things he is excited about are not the things that drive progress in his ecosystem, and that creates a weird dynamic, I guess, for talking about it. But I also don't think he discounts DeFi as such. I think he's just like more, he doesn't want to buy into it just because like everyone else is excited about it, and so on. And I do think he's correct in that like the real use cases, the real value in DeFi is sort of slightly more hard to find than maybe people are making it out to seem, right? Like a lot of it is circular.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, that might lead us into the next topic. If depends on what you mean by the real value, right? We have multiple examples around the world of people who don't have access to solid payment rails or cheap payment rails or a stable economy where just DeFi, by virtue of being able to hold Tether or USDC, this by itself provides massive value.
That as DeFi.
Why?
Like that's just,
I mean, it is a centralized finance. I mean, you're holding an asset and moving.
Right?
Okay, whatever. It is still something that you're moving through the centralized rails, and for them, it is. For them, it is.
Well, just to explain my rationale. So using a blockchain, I don't count as the DeFi industry. That's like the blockchain. Like payments, yes, are sort of a part of maybe like finance in general, but DeFi tends to be application layer things on top of these blockchains that provide financial services of some kind. And I don't think Tether, the company, is DeFi. and that's why I don't put them in the same bucket. But
Hell, man,
those people who use Tether may benefit from DeFi applications as well.
if
Yeah.
you live in Argentina or whatever, holding Tether and putting it somewhere for people to borrow to earn yield, that's DeFi. And that's actually holding value
is
and that's holding value for you in a currency that whatever the US might be making to the dollar is going to appreciate much slower than yours. So there are DeFi use cases that make a significant difference for people out there.
But I'm saying holding Tether is not equal to DeFi in my mind.
Okay, if you hold Tether on a chain and that's it, sure, fine. But it's easier
If I
once.
send Tether to Mika, I can't then say I did DeFi.
Yeah. But I mean, I think the differentiation kind of here is that what Vitalik would like to see from DeFi like is more. Let's say you have like option structures, payoffs on chain, but what he wants that to be, I think, more is insurance, because that's that's kind of the real world or the proper application of it. And right now, where a lot of like, well, the options trading is kind of like options trading for shitcoins. It's not that kind of like real valuable use case in a way. Like if you look at all the kind of early prediction markets stuff, it's about, oh yeah, you can hedge wheat prices to lock in your rewards and stuff like that. And that would be like the correct kind of use case, but we just haven't got to that place yet, and that kind of creates frustration.
Well, we need real world assets, right, to do most of that. So like I think a good analogy is there've been like many waves of people trying to optimize the supply chain with like on-chain things. Usually it's around sort of financialization of inventory or invoices or something like that, where if you can just improve the throughput of that whole chain, I think that has a very real world impact. And most of these things have just like kind of crumbled. Well, previously, like there have been all kinds of other issues as well. Everything is expensive, blah blah blah. I think it's like much more viable to attempt things like that today. And which is why, like in crypto in general, it's like everything is tried 3 or 4 times, and then at some point it just works. And so there are no new ideas, but like those types of things like require that there are real world assets which have some kind of legal definitions or boundaries around them in order to function properly. And that hurdle of like, we have from token to this token has some real world rights, that boundary is like super hard to cross. And I think that's like 100% of why people are frustrated. People have been like Materium, Vinay Gupta has been working on this for fucking like, I don't how long, like 8 years or some shit. Like
It was like 2016, 2017.
yeah. And so like it's just really hard, and part of it is hard because blockchains are global and legal frameworks are local. Part of it's hard because governments and things, they update everything super slowly. Part of it is that they don't want to like make big changes, or they don't want to, they're like resistant to new things, and so on and so on. So I think that's why it's hard. And like because the on-chain ecosystem doesn't have those barriers to like DeFi, we can just keep innovating. We sort of like get ahead of like the real stuff, and I think that's actually bound to just keep going, because like this will all the sort of real world stuff will always come slower. Like you just have this sort of like it's not going to get faster at like the rate of adoption very easily. And so then you just get ahead, and then you get circular things which are like not great for sustainability. But one thing that I would argue, and like at least close this off as far as my talking on the point, is that the circularity is actually very helpful because it allows us to test these systems in a real world environment before real things happen. Like there's a big difference between trying to get people to, I don't know, like lend stuff on the Aave that launched originally versus now. Like it's a massive difference. There are banks that are willing to do things on Aave, but no way would they have done anything back in the day. And so you do need that kind of initial testing to make sure that it's robust and to iterate on the product. And then you kind of just wait for like the real stuff to come in, and that's like predicting when that will sort of happen at scale is super hard, I think. But Mika regulation in the EU, I think, will start moving that forward, at least in the EU, much faster. But then it has all kinds of other things because it's so fragmented in terms of legal jurisdiction. Like, do we need to have on-chain IDs which identify us as like a resident of whatever thing? And like, there's a lot of infrastructure that kind of is unnecessary from a technological point of view, but is necessary from a regulatory standpoint, and none of that is gone to a point in adoption where it would be just super easy to like put your house on chain.
This is an adjacent point, but like that's why I think in some sense people got very excited about like crypto gaming, for example, which never really has gone anywhere so far, which is that you have these concentric circles that you try to like grow, and that felt like a potentially large concentric circle market that would help push the other concentric circles forwards in a way, so that they happen faster because you have a large user base. So the incentive starts to grow from there, and like you just have to kind of chip away at these different things a little bit at a time to gain these internal use cases to then incentivize there to be more activity to create those external use cases.
The gaming thing is super weird. There's like conceptually there is no reason why gaming shouldn't be the easiest fucking use case for crypto. Yet somehow we've managed to create a huge number of complete shit games that utilize crypto. And part of it is like UX and whatnot, but like none of the problems are unsolvable. Like literally zero of the problems are unsolvable. The bigger problem is just that all the games suck.
That's because they're highly financial as Ponzi's first and games not even second, like fifth.
But that's maybe like the Axie Infinity heritage. But I don't think that's necessarily always the case. Like you can
we'll see.
don't make a well, actually I would argue that the problem is not so much that they're financialized Ponzi's first and like whatever. It's more just that it's actually quite hard to make a popular game. Like it's like you make 100, maybe one of them works out.
Yeah.
And the ones that have become popular to date have become popular on like Ponzi structures. But that doesn't always need to be the case. But it's like big, like we're talking like multi-million player games that have functioning internal economies. Like there's not that many in the world that have worked in general. There's like maybe 20 or something like that.
I think like you're right, and the way to get like a good game here is to, number one, produce a good game, and then like Ponzi is such a strong word here, but like semi-financialize the growth aspect of it. Like if there's one thing we know how to do in crypto is to create like these structures of like farming and like incentives, and like I do think there is a path there where I wouldn't say you full Ponzi, but you semi-Ponzi it, but like you semi-Ponzi it in a nice way.
So just a Ponzi tip is what you want.
Just a little bit of Ponzi, but like in a
you mean
where
Ponzi in terms of like bootstrapping the initial
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not Ponzi
like,
as in take everyone's money.
like incentives to drive growth is the more beautiful way to say it, and like financially there may be some crossover with Ponzi-ish aspects on it, but yeah, I think you're right that it's just hard to make a good game.
Right. Just to just to make sure that this isn't badly misconstrued, we're using Ponzi as a very broad term to cover basically crypto incentives, because it's like, I don't. There are a
we
lot of
actually mean
actual Ponzi mechanics, and then there are things that sort of are like a little bit like, and then there are like legit incentives, and we're just referring to all of them as like semi
did we say Ponzi? We actually meant highly refined tokenomics.
right? Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
just
yeah, exactly.
imagining it, Mika, like a newspaper article, like Mika Honkasalo says, if you
We
want to
need
be
better Ponzi's.
successful, you just Ponzify your product.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Like
yeah, like well, it's that, but then there's also like another so the other approach to that, which is harder, and so I think like what you're describing is kind of like what people have tried to do. I think the games have not been good enough is like one thing. But then the other approach is to like make a game first, and then don't try to bootstrap the initial user base with financial incentives, because that's potentially harmful to the actual game. And instead, like, once you have a successful game, you have opportunities to financialize portions of it. So like a good example is Counter-Strike, right? Like probably the Counter-Strike and World of Warcraft are the longest standing sort of internal economy games of all time. Um, and like in Counter-Strike, the internal economy is around skins. In World of Warcraft, the internal economy is like more explicit. It's not a real world economy. So Counter-Strike has a real money internal economy around skins, and World of Warcraft has an internal economy in the game, which is not real money, but is sort of a little bit real money, because there are Chinese gold farmers that sell gold for real money, which creates problems. But the point is, like, if you make Counter-Strike, you can then like create all these mechanisms around that to provide an economy for it, and potentially, like, instead of like what Counter-Strike is doing is they take a cut of the trading fees between skins, and then they sell loot boxes, is essentially the mechanism. Things loot boxes, super questionable practice in my opinion, but also industry standard. You could do that in a very like verifiable neutral way. But the actual trading fee thing is like a pretty natural business model, right? Like if you have a
Yeah.
lot of trading of something with value, then you can just take a cut of that, and in the blockchain context, that could go to not just a company but to an economy.
No, and the issue what I have, what I find so, I don't want to say necessarily distasteful, but what I'm generally dismissive of the whole use your VC money to incentivize the initial users. Well, first of all, is that if you have to pay somebody to pay your game, chances are there are some issues with the game in the first place. But second, every freaking study on motivation that I have seen shows that providing, even if the game had been good in the first place, providing an extrinsic motivator for somebody to do an activity destroys any intrinsic motivation that they may have had to do it on their own in the first place. That might be fine when what you need is to actually bootstrap some liquidity so that your lending thing looks good. On a game, that's a freaking terrible match.
There may be games where that makes sense, and this is like slightly underexplored, I think. But like there's certainly, if you imagine kind of like purely on-chain games, where the concept of the game is like sort of economic in general, then it may actually make sense. But it's hard to know. But I do wish like there would just in general be like more focus on the game, because like other, like, if people don't actually want to play the game, items in the game do not become intrinsically valuable, and then you can't create a sustainable economy. And if you try to force that by incentives, then you very easily just have this sort of Axie Infinity crash at some point. But yeah, I'm hoping that changes at some point in the future. One interesting question is also just like games take a lot of money to build, and like they need to be maintained and updated, and how does a DAO kind of do that, and can we organize people in a decentralized context effectively enough to have that model work, versus if you can just do it as a company and you get all the revenue. But
Well,
maybe we'll
that's-
find out.
That's going to be a topic for another time, I think. And I suspect we're going to skew back to my assumption that DAOs are generally useless and you might as well just start with a company anyway. But
Well, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now, but like DAOs are messy for sure.
Yeah.
But I think all of us need to jump in well, basically now. And so we will leave it there. I hope everyone has learned nothing during this.
I think
this
we
podcast.
covered 2 of the like 7 things we went to, and then we covered 2 things that we didn't mean to. So
Yeah, which is
as usual.
Yeah.
That's
okay, now
actually
I
not bad average.
how these podcasts work. Now I got a better picture.
Yeah. Well, you know how like whenever there's big news, like all the podcasts will put out like emergency episode, whatever. We always cover that shit, and then the episode comes out like 2 months later, and it's like I in my mind, the people who listen to our podcast just live on this like 2-month informational delay, and I'm generally confused as to what's going on at all times. But that's exactly the way I like it. So. I guess see you all next time.
Ta-ta.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.